The most famous study in American history, or should I say infamous, is the Tuskegee Syphilis study. But you know what? Almost everybody thinks that there were just a few people who created the study and managed it, and that virtually nobody else knew about it, that it was a deep, dark secret. But I have new information that shows that that is not true, and I have not seen anybody else on YouTube talk about this whatsoever. I have definitive proof that virtually everybody knew about this except for the men in the study. So in 1936, for example, if you were teaching infectious disease at a American university, you probably knew about this. Certainly, if you worked for the United States Public Health Service, you knew about this. If you were a member of Congress, you had been given a report that discussed this. It was not a secret at all. Today, I'm going to tell you what syphilis is, what this Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment did, what the results were, definitive proof that virtually everybody knew about this, even though the very point, was to take untreated syphilis men at a time when there were treatments for syphilis all the way to the autopsy table. It is crazy. Let's get into it. Syphilis is a sexually transmitted infection that is caused by the bacterium Treponema pallidum. It usually starts as a single painless sore, a canker, that often goes unnoticed. If untreated, it progresses through multiple stages: a rash, fever, sore throat, fatigue, and then it can go latent for years before attacking the brain, the heart, disfiguring people, all sorts of really horrific things. It is not a pleasant way to die. The good news is that today it's easily curable and has been since 1945 by penicillin. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service launched their study, which they called the Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. It took place in Macon County, Alabama. They recruited 600 poor black men. 399 of them had syphilis and the rest did not. Now, when I say these were poor black men, these were poor men from 1936 standards at a time when there was no safety nets at all. There were no government programs at all to help the poor. So these men worked 18 hours a day in the hot Alabama sun, most of them as sharecroppers, just to barely, and I do mean barely, feed their families and essentially have not a hell of a lot of anything else other than a little bit of food and a little bit of shelter. These men worked unbelievably hard and certainly deserved a lot more than this. But what these men were promised is free health care, free food, at least at the time that they were receiving their health care, and free burial insurance. The only thing that they actually got was a free burial. And I guess if you're going to kill someone, the least you can do is bury them, right? Now, what's incredible about this is that this was not private at all. This was a well-known and well-publicized public health initiative. Anybody involved in public health in the United States at a somewhat high level would have known about this project, or at least could have found out about it if they had inquired to dig into the topic a little bit more than just reading a headline, perhaps, in a study. In 1936, 4 doctors published their findings in a federal medical bulletin titled Untreated Syphilis in the Male Negro, a comparative study of treated and untreated cases. The paper appeared in the United States Public Health Service's own journal, Venereal Disease Information, Volume 17, Number 9. In it, they wrote, and I cannot overstate how chilling this is, they wrote, such individuals seem to offer an unusual opportunity to study the untreated syphilitic patient from the beginning of the disease to the death of the infected person. That's their language, an opportunity. To the death. They were going to take these men all the way to the autopsy table to find out exactly how syphilis killed them. They went on to explain that 399 men with untreated syphilis and 201 without were regularly examined, x-rayed, and tested, including spinal taps that they told the men were special, free treatments. Then came the line that still chills everyone today. The exact interpretation of these manifestations awaits more definite proof, which it is hoped may be accumulated by following the untreated syphilitic individuals over a period of years, ultimately bringing a number to autopsy. In other words, we'll all know more when more of these men die. Now, between the time this study began and 1945, syphilis was treatable but not curable. There were treatments that were made of arsenic, which basically halted syphilis in its tracks. The disease basically didn't progress to the more dangerous and deadly states, but it wasn't really a cure. But nonetheless, these men were denied even that. And once 1945 came along, and in 1947, this same organization, the United States Public Health Service, was telling doctors across the country to use penicillin to cure syphilis, were denying this treatment to these men. In fact, during World War II, many of these men were drafted, and the United States Public Health Service stepped in to tell the doctors at the drafting locations not to treat these men because it would ruin the experiment. And local doctors were given lists of these men and told not to treat them. Now, the Centers for Disease Control was founded in 1946 and took over for the United States Public Health Service. Remember, this study began in the 1930s, CDC 1946. I found a memo from 1969 where officials at the CDC are discussing this study, and they're debating on if it should be closed or continued. The debate is not around ethics. The debate is essentially that a lot of these men have died. Some of these men have moved away and they've lost track of them. Is it worth the money, the money to continue the study? Ethics is not even really discussed in this, except there is a line in here where in the meeting notes it says, racial issue was mentioned briefly, will not affect the study. Any questions can be handled by saying these people were at the point that therapy would no longer help them. And the consensus at that meeting was that the study should be continued. So how did it all end finally? Well, in the 1960s, a fellow named Peter Buxton was a public health worker who basically discovered this, even though it was never a secret, should I say, took notice of it. And he talked to officials about it and tried to get it ended. They refused for the same reasons mentioned in the 1969 memo. He then went to the press, where it was a story in the Washington Star, who actually broke the story, and then the next day was on the front cover of the New York Times. The public outrage was immediate, and the study was ended almost immediately. However, dozens of these men had died from syphilis. About 40 women contracted syphilis from these men, and dozens of children were born with syphilis. The women being infected, the children born with syphilis, was all completely unnecessary because treatment had been around since the very beginning and a cure had been around since 1945. Now, I found out this wasn't a secret because I was reading the 1938 Surgeon General's report to Congress, and I know that sounds utterly ridiculous, but I was researching a podcast that we do, and I stumbled across this very line. The study of the effects of untreated syphilis in a group of male Negroes residing in Macon County, Alabama, was continued during the year. And I thought, oh my God, this was not a secret. And that's what caused me to dig into this deeper and find out all of these other things. And I remember learning about this subject in high school, again in college, again as a professional in public health. I used to work in a scientific lab at a major university. I then owned a public health consulting business for a number of years, worked in 39 different states, and now I own a telemedicine company. And this is why when you go to study human subjects, there is such a bureaucratic process. Even if you're going to do a simple survey, people have to fill out a whole bunch of consent forms and things like that. It's because of this very study. And this study is beyond awful. It is a horror story. But I guess, I don't know if I was ever told that it was a secret or if I just really, really wanted it to be. It's easier to believe that a couple of bad people exist rather than the entirety of the United States public health sector being awful, awful people, and reports being sent to Congress, people at major universities being published in the top legitimate scientific journals at the time. Everybody was complicit in this, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. If you learn anything, please drop us a like. My name is Robert from Shameless Care. We'll talk soon.